have to try and build back peace if it breaks down. You know, the statistics are quite grim in the sense that there's at least around a third of peace agreements that break down. That doesn't mean that we give up. Of course we're going to try. There's a moral imperative, and there's also a legal imperative. We are driven by the ideals, the norms, and the laws of international law, of the UN Charter, and a whole range of treaties and covenants that have been agreed upon in the last so many decades. We have to get back to the table and we have to try again. That's the only choice for us and for many who are involved in this business of peacemaking. Peace agreements are violated because there are major interests at stake. I mean, war is not just about violence, it's about power. And so you can understand why people go to war even if you don't agree with it. Having an understanding of the conflict is absolutely essential. At the same time, I think it's also important to believe that people change as well. War changes people, war changes societies, and mediators really have to get into understanding what the psyche of the people who made war, and then put ideas on the table and say, in fact, you both sides, or sometimes there are more than two sides, you're not that different. There are common areas on which you can agree. And that's really the starting point. Despite all the divisions in the Security Council, despite the really strident rhetoric that you hear in the Council on a whole range of different issues, I would say that it is striking that there's still so many issues on which Council members still agree. You know, the business of the Council carries on. You see the fireworks around Ukraine, or you see them now around the Middle East. But there's also a whole range of other files, other conflicts on which the Council still continues to agree, pass mandates, give new taskings, and authorize resolutions. The UN is, more than any other organization, a big global platform where all countries can have dialogue. This does not mean that this is a perfect place. These countries argue. But it also means that this is a forum where anyone can raise issues, bring them to the table, and they can be discussed. So this gives us a huge advantage. The UN, principally, the role of the Secretary General and all his envoys and representatives that are deployed around the world, their good offices role is absolutely paramount. What does that mean? Good offices is basically your ability to step in between parties and build dialogue, to prevent conflict, to end wars. Sometimes it's as simple as picking up the phone and calling up people and nudging them in the right direction. Sometimes it's about designing a process and having an entire mediation process. The UN does these things in concert with others. It's not alone in doing so, but the UN is still, despite all the criticism, still at the heart of this business. One important thing to remember is that when we declare success, we need to do it in a spirit of humility. There are always troubling signs when these things are being negotiated. But I want to mention, for instance, the ceasefire agreement in Yemen in 2022. This was signed on as a truce for 6 months, and it has saved thousands and thousands of lives in Yemen. It is not a comprehensive agreement. It is not that the war is officially over, but by and large, the conflict has completely died down. It has meant that humanitarian assistance has been delivered, there has been peace in the cities, the bombings have stopped, not because there haven't been isolated incidents. The reason why I give this example is to illustrate that you don't need to have an overall comprehensive agreement. You can have different types of agreements at different levels that can help save the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Conflict, in some ways, is inevitable. The question is how you manage conflict and what sort of conflict. You can have conflict on peaceful terms that doesn't end up in violence. I think the first thing that any individual, this applies to all of us living everywhere where we are, is to try and understand what the other is saying better, as opposed to only operating from your own vantage point, which means that at the heart of this is dialogue. Societies that have better mechanisms for dialogue are societies that flourish. That's really the one thing that everyone can do. We can all give the other side the benefit of the doubt and try and understand. I think peacemaking will always be essential. And whether that's the UN, whether there are other international instruments that do it, is, of course, remains to be seen. But I think this need is always going to be there. And what better goal than, of course, to try and work on the cause of peace.